Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Iklik, for this kind introduction. And I agree with you. Sessions after lunch are not easy. You have to, there are significant challenges, but I'll try to do my best to make it, as easy as possible. I would like also to start by thanking the organizers of this prestigious institution, ISAR, for their efforts and also for their hospitality. I'd like to thank in particular Dr. Bedir for the kind invitation and Dr. Tonkai for the, Tonjai, sorry. I don't know Turkish, so please forgive me for all the efforts and the hard work that went into the organization of this interesting meeting. I'm really honored to be here today to share some thoughts about this interesting topic, ART, or Assisted Reproductive Technologies. And I was asked to give some sort of an overview of the experience in Egypt. So I decided to focus on a particular fatwa that was issued by the late Mufti Jad al-Haq, Ali Jad al-Haq. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Thank you. So my presentation today is divided into these broad lines: assisted reproductive technologies, a general overview, introduction, fatwas as a source of Islamic normative positions, and then I will narrow it down or zoom in on the fatwa by Jad al-Haq, Ali Jad al-Haq, and then impact on subsequent discussions, the impact of this fatwa, and then more about also the current situation close to the end of my presentation. So over these 2 days, we have heard a lot, many sophisticated presentations and speeches that have given us actually a wealth of information about the various dimensions of this topic of the interaction between Islamic law broadly conceived and biomedical technologies or bioethical issues and dilemmas. And I think all these wonderful presentations definitely will make my speech or my presentation much easier. So what do we mean by assisted reproductive technologies? This is a term that is used to include a range of technologies, procedures, and applications that aim at overcoming infertility issues. There are various types also and varieties of infertility. Some of them are male factor or male related, others are female related. For the purpose of this meeting, ART or ARTs have really transformed and revolutionized so many things. I would say, even the world that we live in and our perception of the world as well. And so among other things, they facilitated this separation between reproduction and coitus. So for the longer part of human history, these were two inseparable kind of procedures or parts or processes. But these technologies have facilitated the process of separation and division. And what comes with that is further control or ability to exercise control over not only to overcome infertility problems, but also increase the degree of control over the outcome of the process of procreation. What came with that is, of course, several challenging questions of different nature, of different types, philosophical, theological, sociological, you name it. And one of the most interesting and also challenging question is the conceptualization of infertility itself, particularly from a theological or religious perspective, and whether it should be looked at as a disease or not, a disease that requires treatment or should be treated, or, again, from a religious theological perspective, a faith that should be accepted and submitted to, right? And I think from a medical perspective, and I think more people actually kind of would argue that it is considered a disease that should be treated, at least from the perspective of assisted reproductive technologies. And I think looking at the fatwa literature, you see that many jurists also somehow adopt this kind of attitude regarding this issue of infertility. This is something that needs to be addressed because procreation, reproduction is an important human need. It is something that has to do with who we are, our identity. We want to extend our existence and our names, and we want to have children, etc., etc. So that also includes definition, or rather redefinition, of the nuclear family itself, including the very foundational notions or meanings of parenthood or parentage, including paternity, maternity, and the very definition of these. So who is the father? This is now a very important question in bioethical discourses and discussion. Who is the mother, especially in light of IVF procedures and even mitochondria kind of transplantation? We heard about that earlier today and also yesterday. So the possibility of shared paternity, shared maternity. And what is interesting also to note here, from an Islamic legal perspective, Islamic legal historical perspective, is to see how some jurists actually were talking about this perhaps centuries ago. So it's really, you look at these kinds of discussion and you see how prescient actually they were. As much as these technologies and procedures have given rise, have facilitated so many things, they increased, the ease in people's lives, etc. But they also gave rise to a number of challenging ethical, legal, and social questions, including these ones that are listed here. And of course, the list here is not inclusive, but it's just a sample of the questions. So it started with the moral status of the embryo. I think lower?
Yeah, the translators request that you should raise your voice.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Please let me know if I'm not getting across clearly. Can you hear me now clearly? Yeah? Wonderful. Thank you very much. So yesterday we heard about the problems associated with the question of the moral status of the embryo, and I think much actually depends on that. It has to do with the issue of abortion, but also surplus kind of embryos, among other issues. Cryopreservation of pre-embryos, and that in itself gives rise to so many other questions or sub-questions when it comes to the management of this procedure. And also the question of rights. Who has the right of access to these kinds of cryopreserved gametes, if you will? And in case of divorce, and in case of death, what happens? So it becomes quite complicated. Post-marital or post-mortem conception, manipulation of oocytes and embryo in vitro, methods of dealing with surplus or unwanted embryos. We heard earlier about stem cell research and how in this debate, arguments are made to utilize these embryos for stem cell research, and how problematic and how controversial these issues actually are. Ultimately, most of these questions, they boil down to this question of commercialization of the human reproductive function. And most recently, we of course hear about this question of gene editing and designer babies, and whether parents should have the ability to intervene and decide for their future children. And of course, this is a challenging question. Professor Musa touched on that yesterday, and we look forward to further thoughts on this as well this afternoon. So, as Professor Shamsi was talking earlier, as he elaborated in his very detailed presentation about the situation in Iran, we learned that overall the Shi'i view is less restrictive. We can at least it would be safe to say as much, less restrictive than the Sunni view. Realizing, of course, the diversity even within the Shia community, because this is another also misconception that the Shia kind of community, according to them, everything goes, right? Which, of course, is not true. But for the purpose of this presentation, we'll be focusing mainly on the Sunni perspective, particularly in light of the fatwa that was given by the Mufti, late Mufti Sheikh Jad al-Haq, first Mufti and then later on Sheikh al-Azhar. So we can talk about a consensus or near consensus within the Sunni context on procedures like surrogacy or third-party involvement in general, either in the form of ovum donation or sperm donation or embryo donation or even surrogacy. And we will get to learn or know how and why these arguments are made. So the fatwa that I'm talking about was issued in March 1980. So it was one of the earliest fatwas that were given on this issue, shortly after the first successful conception and birth of IVF child, Louise Brown, in I think 25th of July 1978. Before I move to the fatwa, I thought I should give a brief overview of the importance of fatwa as a genre within the Islamic legal context, both in the pre-modern period and also in the modern period. I know I'm running, the risk of repeating some pieces of information that were already mentioned, so I will go through this section quickly. And basically what I wanted to highlight here is, when it comes to the definition of the fatwa itself, is the non-binding nature of the fatwa. This has been the mainstream understanding of the fatwa. It is a considered legal opinion, but it is, after all, non-binding. When we move to the modern period, of course, we will get to see how this changed a little bit and how, depending on the national setting or the political structure, or sometimes fatwa could become binding somehow. So it is one of the important genres within the Islamic legal tradition. It has always been one of the important parts of the Islamic legal tradition, and in terms of history, we can trace its history all the way to the scripture sources of Islam in the Quran and also the practice of the Prophet himself. So we have the term يستفتونك mentioned in the Quran several times with reference to actual questions that were brought to the Prophet by community members. When the Prophet has a ready answer, he would give it, and when he doesn't, he would wait for revelation. So fatwas, I think, my personal opinion is that it's one of the most interesting facets and aspects of Islamic law, because it actually shows you Islamic law in action. It's not just Islamic law in theory, but how experts and how jurists actually implement these abstract, thoughts and concepts and relate them to real life incidents. It also reflects the continuing role of Sharia in providing answers and solutions to people's emerging needs and questions. It also it is a statement of the comprehensive scope of Sharia. As we know, when we talk about Ahkam Shari'iyya, Professor Badir gave us a very elaborate presentation yesterday about how Islamic law works in terms of the usul literature, etc. But in general, we have two types of ahkam, Islamic legal rulings. Ahkam taklifiyya, the five main rulings and أحكام وضعية which work together with the أحكام التكليفية in order to provide the proper causes, stipulations, or impediments for the application or implementation of the various rules. Fatwa and the work of the Mufti has been associated with several other important concepts and themes, most importantly, the concept of ijtihad. So we heard earlier this morning in some of the presentation on how when a jurist is presented with a question, if there is a ready answer, he can give it. If there is no ready answer, then he or she should exercise ijtihad. So in the literature, usuli literature, oftentimes there is this kind of relevance and connection between ijtihad and ifta, mujtahid and mufti, qualifications of the mujtahid, qualification of the mufti, to the extent that some people would require, or stipulate, that the mufti should be a mujtahid. In terms of classifications and types, when it comes to the subject matter of the fatwa itself, it could be just a simple answer to that there is, or for which there is a precedent already in the tradition, or it could be an answer to an unprecedented question, or nazila, or haditha. There are other juristic classifications, such as this one, when it comes to the fatwa related to rituals, transactions, or manners and akhlaq, etc. Some people would include also other items like theology or theological issues. In the modern period, you could also include many other types as well. In terms of historical development, as I said, you can trace it all the way to the Prophet himself, who acted also as a mufti, and this has to do with an important kind of discussion in usuli literature that has to do with the roles of the Prophet. One of the most important roles that he assumed was that as a mufti. The companions and the rightly guided caliphs also, they served as muftis. With the emergence of the Umayyad Caliphate, we started to see this kind of division in the notion of authority, and that, of course, necessitated the need for dedicated kind of scholars or individuals who have a more in-depth knowledge of Islamic law and also ability to provide Sharia perspective or Sharia rulings on issues. And that continued to be the case perhaps until this very day. So we see through the Islamic history that ifta took different shapes and constructions and applications under various dynasties and caliphates or sultanates, including, of course, the office of Shaykh al-Islam, and how also that office worked together with qada, etc. In the modern period, we have witnessed the emergence of entities or institutions that are dedicated to this process of ifta issuing. This morning we had a presentation about collective ijtihad or fatwa institution, and also we heard about the experience in Indonesia as well. So these two genres, ifta and qada, as I said, show us Islamic law in action. The main distinctions, however, include these ones. When it comes to the qualification of the jurors, usually mufti is considered, of a higher ranking than an qadi. Also, when it comes to the authority of the opinion, that al-qada yarfa al-khilaf, but of course that doesn't exist in ifta, because in the ifta is still within the realm of khilaf. So depending on your ability to make an argument and to provide a well-reasoned kind of opinion or hukm, then it can be accepted or could be criticized, etc. Scope of application and also power of enforcement. So when it comes to qada, one of the most distinguishing aspects of it is that it is enforceable through delegated authority from, Sultan, the Caliph, the political authority, but ifta, for the most part, lacks that part. So in the contemporary period or in the modern period, we see some important changes. It has undergone significant transformations. The most important one has to do with, as I said, the emergence of collective ijtihad. And we heard yesterday Dr. Rajab was talking about how it's important to keep it individual. So some people may want to hide behind this kind of corporate institutional identity of these institutions. And it is an interesting view or point to keep in mind as well. But overall, when we look at fatwa as a genre, we can see that it can be a source of important and interesting tensions in the modern period when it comes to this kind of relationship between the pre-modern tradition and the modern period and reality. Professor Musa told us about these changing cosmologies, right? And other scholars also were talking about how to make the pre-modern tradition relevant to the modern needs and questions. So the task that the jurist should basically commit to is not just to reiterate classical views, but basically to perhaps look at them for inspiration, but the main task is basically to provide a Sharia kind of perspective on the emerging needs and questions that were born from the modern reality, that emerged from that reality. And in doing this, they would be basically emulating earlier and classical jurists who did what they did in order to answer the questions of their day and the needs of their times and places, etc. Different types of authority. Also, earlier we were talking about the relationship between the fatwa discourse or fatwas and other stakeholders in the public domain. Most importantly, the state and its different kind of parts, but also the civil society and the specialized kind of professional communities, etc. So fatwa doesn't exist in isolation, but fatwa exists in a setting, in a context, and it has to basically interact with that setting. As I said, in some countries, fatwas, depending on the political, the judicial kind of arrangements, may become binding, right? Especially if it is solicited by the government or by the judicial branch or by courts, etc., depending again on how fatwa institutions are integrated within the state apparatus. So in most cases, we see in most Muslim majority countries, we have institutions dedicated to ifta, for example, and these institutions are either affiliated with something like Ministry of Awqaf or Ministry of Justice, or that they are totally independent. When we talk about tensions that fatwas kind of give rise to, we also need to think about the perception of fatwa. So fatwas, unfortunately, sometimes are perceived. Oh man, I have to move quickly now. Now, this is usually within the Muslim majority countries, but also within the Muslim minority context, there are various other problematics and challenges as well. So being kind of cognizant of the limitations on the time, I have to move quickly here and just move into the fatwa by Jad al-Haq. He was quite an eminent and highly accomplished, actually, jurist. He was born in 1917, and he basically completed advanced degrees at Al-Azhar University in Cairo, Faculty of Sharia. And upon graduation, he was immediately appointed in the Ifta department, or Dar al-Ifta, in 1956. And eventually, he was appointed as the head mufti of Egypt in 1978. Subsequently, he was appointed as, Minister of Religious Endowments in January 1982. And in 1982, the same year in March, so 3 months later, he was appointed as the rector of Jami' al-Azhar or Sheikh al-Azhar, a position that he held until his death in March 1996. So why is this fatwa important? As I said, it was one of the earliest fatwas. It was issued in 1980. The profile of the author, quite distinguished, but it is also one of the most comprehensive fatwas on this issue. So it's a 16-page long fatwa that addressed not only the questions that emerged at that time back in 1980 or late 70s, but actually it, according to, as we'll see in a minute, it talked also about some potential kind of issues or questions that actually emerged later on. The fatwa, as it is listed in the collection of Dar al-Ifta in Egypt, is anonymous, so it doesn't indicate the questioner. But a few days ago, actually, I just by chance, I came across this TV interview. I'm sorry, it is in Arabic, and it actually revealed the identity of the questioner or the petitioner of this fatwa. So there is internet here, right? Yeah. So this is Dr. Jamal Abu Surur, and for those of you who are familiar with bioethics in Egypt, he's one of the pioneers of bioethics and bioethical discourses in Egypt. He's also the founder of the first IVF clinic or center in Egypt. In the literature, he's seen as like the father of ART in Egypt, basically. So here, the occasion here was that he received an award, or he was recognized actually in last August in the Day of Science. So he received an award from the Egyptian president, and then he was on the TV talking about his experience, etc. Yeah. So it is an interesting clip, about 3 minutes. For the interest of time, I can't just proceed.
Dr. Raymond, can you come to your conclusion, please?
Yeah, sure. So basically, the fatwa is divided into several main sections: the general principles, body of the fatwa, and then some conclusions. And as it is the case, for those of you who are familiar with the fatwa collection in Dar al-Ifta, each fatwa is preceded with a set of general principles that capture basically the main points of the fatwa. So here we have about 11 main or general principles that talk about objectives of Sharia, how this is placed within this framework, how the process of procreation should be done in the normal, natural way unless there is a necessity or a need to resort to IVF. And basically, among other things, it identifies what's permissible and what is not permissible. And in addition to this, it talks also about the ethical legal position or status of the parties, like the husband, the physician, and also the position or the status of the child. So when it comes to the questions, the fatwa includes answers to 7 main questions. And because I don't have time, maybe in the question and answer, I can elaborate more on this. So 7 main questions that include the most famous scenarios of IVF. And in the concluding section, which is very interesting, it talks about, this general theological and ethical also principles that should govern the process of in vitro fertilization or artificial inseminations. What's interesting about this fatwa is that it captures also some of the earlier fatwas that were given either within Dar al-Ifta or by other Egyptian scholars, and also how it served as a very important precedent in the literature that almost each and every new fatwa, at least in Egypt, has to somehow relate or mention or reference this fatwa by Jad al-Haq. These slides here just indicate how also the fatwa is incorporated in the subsequent decisions by also the collective ijtihad institutions. So here is some general concluding remarks, why it is important, because, as I said, it has to do with the profile of the author. But the main point I wanted to highlight in the conclusion basically is for a fatwa to become as effective or as successful and impactful, it has to address basically these issues in a serious and engaged manner. Thank you very much.
Dr. Ayman, thank you very much for your very impressive presentation. I would like to make, especially for this session, if you have understanding questions, maybe after presentation, and then we can do this meta discussion at the end of this session. Do you have any understanding questions to Dr. Ayman? It was just introduction, you mean?
Actually, I was planning for 50,
So, no. It is 30 minutes, and someone told me that the presenters has 30 minutes for presentation, and I had yesterday 25 minutes and 20 minutes for discussion. I think the some very, basic things is well known, but on the other side, we should more time for discussion. This is the problem, I think, and therefore I can imagine if there is some questions for.
It's he's right. You didn't got the main idea. I suggest that you can give him 5 minutes to tell us the fact. I think it's a very important part of his presentation. Yeah.
I gave him 10 minutes, not 5 minutes, but.
What is Fetva?
So maybe very clear conclusions of your presentation.
Yes, I'm sorry for the confusion because, as I said, I was in the same position like the earlier presenter. When I looked at the schedule, I saw 50 minutes, so that's what I planned for. But anyway, the fatwa, it is actually a composite one. It's not just an answer to a single question, but actually it includes detailed answers to 7 separate, disparate questions that have to do with the various scenarios within the larger domain of artificial insemination and also including IVF. So basically it starts out by giving these 7 cases or 7 scenarios. If you followed the earlier presentations in مجمع الفقه الإسلامي الدولي or رابطة العالم الإسلامي, you see that also the other institutional fatwas, they give some scenarios, like 7 or 8 scenarios.
Questions?
Yeah, excuse me. So these are the questions. The first one is about artificial insemination. The second one is about sperm donation, and then ovum donation. And then the fourth question is divided into A and B. The first one is about straightforward IVF within marriage, which is, can be allowed. And the second one included a hypothetical issue in case, for example, after couples undergo the process of in vitro fertilization, instead of depositing the embryo in the mother's womb or uterus, then whether it would be possible to place it in an animal, that whether that would be also possible or not. And the fifth one has to do with the legal ethical position or status of the husband. And the sixth one has to do with the legal ethical position or status of the resulting child, whether that child can be recognized equally like a legitimate child or not. And then the final one has to do with the legal ethical position or status of the physician. The introduction is the part where he lays out, the methodological part and etc. When it comes to the first question, he gave the opinion that it should be stipulated permissibility. It can be permissible as long as it is done within the framework of marriage, and as long as necessary precautions are taken. So to ensure that gametes are not confused or replaced, etc. The second one, when it comes to sperm donation, it is totally prohibited because it amounts to third-party involvement. And similar way, ovum donation as well. And the reasoning given here is this similitude with zina or adultery. So and he's very careful in phrasing this and framing it, that it is not actually adultery, but it is similar. It shares with adultery in terms of consequences, right? Confusion of lineages or mixing of lineages, yes. IVF, the straightforward kind of procedure, this is also similar to the first scenario, is a stipulated permissibility, that it can be permissible as long as, necessary precautions are taken, and as long as it is done within the framework of marriage, only the husband and the wife are involved. When it comes to the fourth question, the second kind of section, use of animals, he was totally against this because according to him that would amount to change of khalqullah and will get us into this kind of theological problematics. And of course I can speak more on this if I have a chance in the question and answer session. When it comes to the position of the husband from the Sharia perspective, the husband, if he engages in any of the prohibited procedures, he would be considered sinful. And he even used a harsh word that is, the youth or cuckold, or to indicate again this relationship between this procedure and adultery. The sixth question about the status of the child, it would, if it is done within the framework of any of the prohibited procedures, then the child is not considered legitimate. He's a biological child, can be only attributed to his mother, but not to his father. And finally, the physician also, if he engages in any of these prohibited scenarios, he would be considered sinful as well.